Welcome to Advertising, How to Build a Strategy to Get Results. For those of you who don't know us, I'm Amanda Sutt. I am the Creative Director and CEO here at Rock, Paper, Scissors. We are a branding and marketing firm that works with our clients to help them align their message and their brand with their team, their community, and their audience. So they're speaking from one voice to achieve their vision and purpose. So we've been in the business for over 30 years. So we've seen a lot of changing and done a lot of changing ourselves. Needless to say, the amount of changing that's had to happen this year. But joining me today is Madison Hooper, our designer and ad strategist.
Good morning.
All right. So I do want to give everybody a heads up that this is a conversation. So before we dive into this, please post questions and comments in the chat as they pop up and you're thinking about them. We'll pause at the end for questions and go through that. We've collected some questions prior to starting today's presentation as well. So let us know that we really want to hear from you and what you guys need in order to really make ad strategy a part of your marketing mix. So before we actually dive into advertising, I want to take a step back and talk about marketing and how advertising fits into the big picture, because not all marketing is advertising. So I want to start with defining what marketing is. And Allan Dib, the author of the One-Page Marketing Plan, has a beautiful story to wrap this up. So we're just gonna lean into what he has. So if a circus is coming to town, and you paint a sign saying Circus Coming to Showground Saturday, that's advertising. If you put a sign on the back of an elephant and walk it into town, that's promotion. If that elephant walks through the mayor's flower bed and the local newspaper writes a story about it, that's publicity. If you get the mayor to laugh about it, then that's public relations. If the town citizens go to the circus, you show them the many entertainment booths, explain how much fun they'll have spending money at the booths, answer their questions, and ultimately they spend lots of money at the circus, that's sales. And if you plan the whole thing, that's marketing. So I'd like to start with that just to kind of give a basis of how this fits into pieces, because people use those as synonyms, marketing, advertising, and they're really not. So I want to be clear about that before we dive into specifically what advertising is.
And so one question that we see a lot is, does advertising even work? And a lot of that has to do with how often people are seeing things throughout their days. So on an average basis, we see between 4,000 and 10,000 ads per day. And with that level of overwhelm, how do you even know if it's going to work for your business? Well, we're here to tell you that it is still working. Advertising is still working. Part of the reason that it is working is because we've had to grow and really refocus. Advertising does not look the same as it used to. And it's not just about product placement or TV ads or just asking people to buy your product. There's a lot more that goes into the process, and it's really ever changing, especially in a year like we've had where everything is ever changing. But we also have a lot more choices than we did before. And it really comes down to how you use the choices that are available to you to make the best decisions and selecting those channels so that you have the best return on your investment. So digging in a little bit deeper, does it really work? And here's why. It works collectively. And without it, you wouldn't actually learn anything new about products or services, but it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. So essentially, advertising works if you work it. Methods are different based on a different business, and it really depends on what your goal is. So we talk a lot about goal setting, especially when we talk about annual marketing plans. And if you don't have a goal and you don't know where you're trying to get, it's really hard to have strategy in the middle for a specific tactic like advertising. So what is your goal? Are you focused more on conversion, or are you focused on brand awareness? Are you focused on gaining new leads, or are you just trying to retarget the leads that you have? Are you trying to boost your sales, or is the focus on building engagement and fostering relationships with your current audience? Once you have an understanding of the strategy behind the advertising that you're doing, it's a lot easier to make educated decisions on whether or not your ads are going to work for you.
Okay, so before we get too deep in the details of ads, I want to bring up the good old sales funnel, because this helps us understand the journey of our customer as they go through making a decision process. We earlier this year did a whole presentation on the sales funnel and did a deep dive into it. So we'll send in the follow-up a link to this one. So if this is something you're unfamiliar with and not, something you want to learn a little bit more about, we'll supply that. But just high level, every time anybody makes any type of decision, whether it's buying something from you, deciding to, change internet providers, any of that, people have to go through this process. It starts with awareness. Do I even need a thing? Is it a thing? Into interest of, okay, that may be something I need, to decision, to comparing, and then action through that. And so this cycle has not changed. And I think this is an important part to think about. Even though we're getting faster with social media marketing and just social media in general, digital advertising, humans still take the same amount of time to make decisions. We can just reach more people quicker and track it. So it's important to take that into consideration of what stage somebody is at the funnel as they go through this process. We're going to come back to this in just a little bit.
So one thing we like to talk about when we talk about ads is that they are essentially like icebergs. You see a very, very small portion, the ad itself, but there's a lot more that is under the surface that really builds up that visual ad piece that helps make it work and also helps make it so that you actually see it. So the things that you don't see are really those campaign goals. That also ties back into your overall business goals for the year. We don't necessarily see things like channel selection or campaign tracking. So how do you actually know it's working? You don't ever actually see the creative development that actually goes into what the visual ad looks like. And then you also don't necessarily see the follow-up strategy. Sometimes you feel the follow-up strategy as you're scrolling through other sites. You may see things again. But there's a lot of post planning and pre-planning that goes into play when it comes to advertising. So Don Draper makes it look very easy when he's just, laying on the couch and drinking cocktails all day, but there is a lot more going on in his head that you can't hear or see.
All right, so to simplify the ever changing complex makeup of advertising, we're going to group ads into two categories. We're going to talk about traditional and we're going to talk about digital. Traditional is television, print advertising, billboards, radio, those quote unquote Don Draper strategies. And then digital is going to be more social media ads, podcast advertising, pay per click, just to name a few. This list keeps getting longer and longer. So both have their place in today's advertising world. And so businesses can often benefit from utilizing channels from both areas. And I'm going to do a little side note here because I think it's important to note. The reason I said we're simplifying that is that we're now getting ad options that can do both, like newspapers who do both print and digital insertions, as well as the traditional that's transitioning into digital. So like streaming platforms like Netflix or Hulu, or digital ads on like things like Pandora. So it's getting mushy, but for today's purposes, let's think about them in these two buckets and talk to me in a year, and I'm sure we'll change how we might not even talk about two buckets anymore. But that being said, we're going to focus on digital today because we can really kind of map out that sales funnel that we talked about a little bit earlier by focusing in what this is. And we see a lot more questions because people are more familiar with the traditional. They understand what that looks like. And that digital side can get a little bit complicated. Maybe that complicates another word, but it's complex, definitely complex, because there's a lot that we can track. We can see what was happening in the traditional ads that we just couldn't see before, all the interactions, the clicks, the thought processes. So today we're going to focus on three. We're going to focus on display ads. So it's more that visual, and that could be social media. It could be on blogs. There's a lot that goes into display ads. We're going to talk a little bit about geofencing, which could be a display ad. But I want to touch base on it because it's something we hear a lot of questions about, and it's a very cool option to be able to think about when we're talking about strategies. Then the third one we're going to talk about today is pay per click. So basically in your Google results, what's getting posted as paid listings. All right. See, I told you we come back to the sales funnel. So I'm going to start with where these ads fall in the funnel. So the display ad is mainly an awareness thing. And you'll see we stretched it a little bit into interest, mainly because if you start doing retargeting, so see, I can already get off track so quickly with this, you start to hit some of that interest. So there's some things that you can do with them, but majority of why you pick a display ad is because you want to build awareness of your brand. You want to get your name in front of people who don't know who you are or don't know the services that you offer. So if you just need new people to know about you, that would be a reason to pick display. I'm going to let Madison go a little more detail on all of that, but that's just high level. And then pay-per-click, that's really at the decision making. Somebody already knows about it and now they're just trying to decide which one they need. So that really kind of sets up, if you're going to do advertising there, you're also going to have a higher conversion rate, meaning more people are going to act on that ad, but that's because they're ready to buy. Whereas if they're at that awareness level, they're not necessarily ready to buy at this point. So those are just some things to be thinking about when we're looking at any type of advertising. You want to map it back to the strategy and decide where are your gaps and what does that look like. So I'm going to turn it over to Madison so she can walk through the 3 types of ads: the display, the geofencing, and the pay-per-click, to understand how do you start to profile each one of your channels so that you can make the decisions about what you need to do about it.
All right, so first up on our list today, we're going to talk about display ads. Display ads, more than likely in your own personal interactions, you're likely seeing these as social media ads or those ads that sort of follow you around on different sites that you may visit. The key sort of, or the biggest social media ad platforms that people see are Facebook and Instagram, but you do have the option to have display ads on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and then eventually other various social medias as well. The big benefit with display ads, or thing to note, is that those social networks are able to utilize a lot of user information to serve really highly relevant advertisements based on interaction or based on demographic, psychographic information on that platform. So when you think about it, how often you have given Facebook your information. I'm going to try not to make social media sound scary right now. But there's a lot of information that is very beneficial from an advertising perspective. Once ads are clicked, they drive traffic to a landing page where they can learn more information or act on purchasing a product. So this is really sort of the start. Again, this is an awareness tactic. So you're focusing more on high level information and driving people into your platform. So a few pros and cons about social media ads. The pros, I've talked on it a lot already. Very specific targeting for ads. You can really sort of hone in on your perfect or ideal target audience. There's also been a big increase in traffic on social media during COVID-19. People have a little bit more time to mindlessly scroll. Hopefully no one is doing the doom scrolling anymore. But there are also some cons that go along with it. It can be very expensive. At times, I shouldn't say very expensive, but more expensive than other options, because it is another business's platform and money-making opportunity. Sure that your ad is very dynamic, because when people are on that actual platform, they don't necessarily have as much of a desire to leave the platform. And Facebook also doesn't necessarily, I'll use Facebook as our example, doesn't necessarily want you to want them to leave the platform either. So they're going to make it a little bit harder, a little bit more complicated to do that. Once again, this is an awareness tactic. So this is very high level, first step in the funnel. You do have the opportunity to really hyper target, but it is something that you can get too granular very quickly. So I will say my tip to take away with display ads is, yes, you can get very specific, but really consider whether or not very specific is going to serve you and is really going to help you meet those end goals. As far as things to look for, or what does success look like on this platform, you want to focus on your reach. So your metric here is going to be impressions, cost per thousand impression, or CPM. In short, it's eyeballs. You want as many people to see that ad as possible, and it really sort of becomes that numbers game. Since you're pouring people into the top section of your sales funnel, you need a lot of people to start with. Getting into geofencing. So this is, again, sort of a display ad, but sort of not. Geofencing really focuses on delivering visual ads to a very specific geographic location. So think about it like an actual fence that you're drawing. If you have done any advertising with Snapchat or any filters with Snapchat, very similar process where you're actually sort of defining your physical location around a business or around a target audience, and delivering ad content directly to them. Some pros and cons here as well. You can get very specific with location. You can also add additional layering to focus on your demographic audience. But there are some limitations to what areas you can geofence. It does depend on who your target audience is and the area you're trying to target. We work with a few children's brands, and we run into that sometimes as well. So depending on what you're advertising, what your goals are, it's something to be aware of, is that you may not be able to find the perfect location. So you may have to bump that radius out a little bit larger. Since this is also sort of a pseudo display ad, but with some location specific information, it is also an awareness tactic. Focusing on awareness around a specific location. This is a great option for small businesses as well. If you are trying to find people in a specific location or a specific type of location. One big thing to remember on this is being able to determine where people have come from. So you do have the benefit, since it is a digital tactic, of having the backend tracking set up. So you should be able to see things like impressions, again, cost per thousand impressions, but you want to be able to sort of add that additional layer and really ask people where they saw you and see if they can give you more information about that location specifically. So you can do this through digital forms. If they're coming into your place of business, you can do that with, customer information forms or new client forms. So our third and final option today that we're going to talk about is pay-per-click. So pay-per-click is an online advertising model in which advertisers pay each time a user clicks on one of their online ads. Basically here, you're buying a visit to your website rather than attempting to earn that visit organically. So this is things, we've used Google here. Google Ads is the big one, but they do also have these on Yahoo and Bing for people who use Yahoo and Bing. And these search results are things that are going to show up at the top of your page. You can see here in this ad specifically, it includes actual graphics, but you typically will see a little indicator that does say ad. Occasionally, these ads will show up again below the organic search results. So you sort of have two options for placement, depending on how heavily used that search phrase is. These are generated using keywords and some other information as well. So some pros and cons for pay-per-click. Pros, it is a lower cost to maintain, and it is a lower funnel stage tactic that is very highly trackable. So with this tactic specifically, you really want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck, and you have the opportunity here to really interact with people for a very low cost when they're ready to make that decision or very close to making that decision. Cons here, cost in certain industries. So this is another one, like all channels, it really depends on your business vertical. If you're competition is also running a lot of ads on Google, it will be more expensive because you're basically bidding on the same phrases and you're sort of trying to gain the same traction in the same audience pool. And it kind of can become sort of like a pay to play environment. Pay-per-click is also not as visual as something like a display ad. So we talk about how 60% of people are visual learners. There's the potential that you're not necessarily connecting with people the way that works for them as you could with something like a display ad. So when to use your pay-per-click. Pay-per-click is a great strategy if you're focused on meeting your customer's immediate need. Since it is a lower funnel stage tactic, they're either ready to purchase, comparing you and a competitor, or have an immediate need that they need fulfilled, where they don't necessarily have an awareness of a specific brand to fill that need. So they're searching more to have the need filled than who will actually fill it. In this case, success is really going to be evaluated based on conversion rate. So are people completing the intended action and becoming a lead, as well as the total number of leads. We want to make sure that you are fulfilling and converting those prospects into customers. So when PPC is working, that fee is trivial because the visit is worth more than you pay for it. So for example, if you are a customer will bring in $300 to your business over the lifetime of that customer, and it's $3 for them to click on the ad, you have a great return on your investment.
All right. So those are the high level of some tactics, understanding where those go. So it's really important as you're thinking about, okay, that's the ad itself. So I want to take a step back and look about the flow of the experience. What is that true experience for customers? And so what I like to do, and I really like shoes. So this is why we're going to go into a sample and talk a little bit about shoes here. So for instance, if there is an ad that has a cute pair of shoes and you're like, oh, I really like those, I want to buy it. And if that ad takes you just to the website and not to the specific pair of shoes, that is so frustrating for a person. Our example here is Adidas, which Adidas has a lot of shoes. But think about if you go to an even bigger site like Amazon, which Amazon would not do that. They know better. Or Zappos, they know that as well. Think how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of shoes that are there. I'm not going to go find it. So you need to really focus on, if you have an ad, it goes straight to the product you're talking about. Madison's going to touch on this in just a minute when we talk about landing pages, because that's what you want to do. You want to make it as easy as possible. You want to remove as much friction so that people can just buy or they can sign up. Whatever your call to action is, you want them to see it, get excited while they're emotional about it, ready to go, and you want to take out as much friction as possible.
So when we talk about landing pages, this is sort of the next step. So they've seen the ad, they click on the ad, and this is where they land. Well, they land on one of these two pages, and there is one right answer for which page we want them to land on. We talk a lot about the ad and making sure that the ad is clean and simplified and serves the purpose. I'm not going to say beautiful because that's not always the goal. But you want to make sure that the landing page is following some very specific best practices. You want to give your customers a clear place to direct their attention where it's easy for them to complete that intended action. So we really want them to have minimal navigation. So we'll use Costco as our example here. They have quite a few different places where you can actually click on that page. Whereas Shopify, you have one button, and that button is start your free trial. So we really want them to have no navigation, one clear call to action, and then minimal supporting information. We really don't want this to be distracting. So ultimately, be the Shopify of the landing page world. The next thing that you may have to do, whether you are a team of one or you may report to other people or a team of people, is to prove that your investment of advertising is actually working. So the way to do that is to use your reporting and make sure that you are looking at your reporting on a regular basis, both to check anything technical so that you can make pivots and adjustments throughout your campaign process, and just so that you have a pulse on it. Because the best thing about digital advertising is that you can see it throughout the process. We touched on this a little bit throughout, but your vertical is vital. So what sector of business are you in? And that really has to be your benchmark if you're looking for how your ad should be performing against the, greater whole of advertisers in your area. So for example, if you are a local retail store running a Facebook ad selling face masks, very timely, you'll want to pull average statistics for other retail or apparel businesses, because your goals on something like a Facebook campaign are going to be very different from a campaign advertising a larger purchase, like a cruise or a car. So make sure that you know sort of what lane you're in, and then use that as your comparative metric. And ultimately, make sure that the money makes sense. So this goes back into your reporting, making sure that you're looking at it often, tracking it regularly, and monitoring what that return on investment is throughout the process. Because running on certain channels has to make sense, and you have to get your money's worth and make sure that you're seeing long-term success and long-term conversions over time.
All right. And kind of just to wrap up is you have to be willing to try stuff. One of the things that we always talk about is you fail fast. Coming in and know what you need to achieve. Don't do it too short. Like if you only run a campaign for a week, you're not going to have enough data. 3 months is usually a good time to be able to make the adjustments to see if it's really going to be a good long-term strategy. But you should have a cutoff date. If that money doesn't make sense, stop doing it. There's so many channels out there. It's starting to figure out what is really going on with your audience. Where are they? What are they doing? And a lot of this is just, get feedback from people, understand what your audience is doing, where are they spending their time. And so if you can do a couple different options, see which one's performing better, that gives you the ability to really start to curate something that works. And I'll go back to what Madison was saying, why reporting is important. This year has been a great example of why reporting is so important, because we had a huge perception shift. The world changed, and advertising certain ways stopped working there at the beginning of the year. And it's starting to come back. We're starting to see some normal-ish pieces as people are getting, starting to open up, starting to see what happens. But we know it's never going to go back to the way it was. There's going to be some adjustments. We've learned a lot. So it's important to keep eyes on those numbers, because things could change, and keeping eyes on that. Don't assume what has been will always be. So once again, just be experimental, have fun with it, play with it. All right. With that being said, now I want to open up for any questions that anybody has. So feel free to post in the chat, and we can go from there. And we have a couple questions that have been submitted to us as well. All right. I'm going to start, Madison, I'm going to ask you some questions. Mm-hmm. One came in is a boosted Facebook post the same as a Facebook ad?
So a boosted Facebook post is not the same as a Facebook ad. Their boosted Facebook posts and Facebook ads are sisters, not twins, is the best way to put it that I know of. So your boosted Facebook post is an existing post on a Facebook page that you are then supporting with dollars to get more reach. A Facebook ad is going to actually give you quite a few more tools or targeting ability areas that you can adjust it to really expand that. And you have a few more choices with a Facebook ad for who you're interacting with. So it really depends on what your goal is. So a boosted Facebook post, you're more likely to be increasing your reach with your existing audience. So I would make that recommendation if you're focused on engagement or nurturing existing clients. Whereas a Facebook ad, I would suggest going ahead and using that if you're focused more on retargeting previous customers, if you're using something where you want to drive people who visited your website and retarget them that way. Then you...
Okay. No, I think that totally makes sense. So I have a follow-up question I want to make sure I got from Stephanie about Google advertising. So jumping into that, what are recommendations for jumping right into Google advertising?
Google advertising.
Set up some time to talk to Madison first.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to chat. I would love to help. And it really does depend on your business.
Mhm.
So off the top, I am a big fan of Google advertising personally. I think it is something that has been very successful for a lot of clients, depending on what industry vertical you're in. It may be something that is super lucrative, very cost effective, and can really help you get things out. For example, if you're a lawyer, that will change and may not necessarily be as cost effective. With jumping into Google advertising, those goals are going to be really important when you're getting that set up. So make sure that you know exactly what you want to get out of that. And then since it is a lower funnel stage strategy, I would suggest mapping out your sales funnel and make sure that you have things at the top level and don't necessarily depend on Google advertising to be sort of the answer to things. Google advertising takes a little while to be the most effective.
It does. And a lot of it still goes back to, is that where your audience is looking for information? So that's a critical thing. And this is even with questions about Facebook advertising. And I'd say open that up to social media advertising. If you're thinking about LinkedIn or any of those other ones, those might be more expensive, but it's a very targeted audience. You're not going to waste as many dollars on people that are general public. So that's something to really think about. It might seem more expensive if you start hitting some niche advertising, but if that's where your audience is looking for information, you're going to get that same return on investment. So I lean back into that fail fast, go test it, go see what it's like. It's really appealing to look at like the cost per click on ads for pay per click. It's like, oh, that's super cheap. But if that's not where an audience member is actually going to convert or follow through on something, if they're not in the right mindset when they're Googling something, then that cheap deal wasn't even worth it. You just flush dollars down the toilet. So that's an important thing to think about, is what is your audience in that moment before they decide to buy? What are they doing? Are they Googling? Are they asking people? Is word of mouth a bigger piece? So that means awareness. So we're spiraling, aren't we? Hopefully that helps a little bit clarify some of those. Another ad, nope, it's a question. Another question came in. Is it better to focus solely on digital, or are there benefits to using a mix in traditional advertising methods?
So there's always a benefit to using a mix of tactics, whether that is multiple digital tactics or digital and traditional. Ultimately, digital is going to give you a lot more trackability, but traditional also has a little bit, at times, a bigger reach, but some traditional actually comes with a lot of a higher price tag. So it depends on really what your area that you're trying to target and what your goals are. Most digital ad tactics benefit from having other digital tactics run at the same time. We call it a lift, where things perform better if they're getting a chance to see you in multiple places or in multiple avenues. One thing that doesn't necessarily fit, but I guess it's a traditional piece, is just building relationships with your current customers and audiences. And that will always benefit any advertising campaign, regardless of the channel.
And that you can always mirror retargeting with it, which is things you can easily do through social media with your list, so that you're reminding your audience that you're still there and you offer things. See, it gets complicated.
Yes.
It gets complicated very quickly. That's why goals are so important, and understanding what you're starting to do, because it's very easy to like, oh, we could do this, and oh, we could do this. And thinking about how does this really weave together to achieve your results. All right, I have another question. My advertising budget is pretty small, and I'm not sure where to start since we're new to advertising. Are there any pointers you can share on what types of ads we need to try first?
That is such a good question. So if your advertising budget is very small, you may not want to start with social media. And I say that, or not start with social media ads. You may opt to go the Facebook boost strategy where you can use a smaller budget. There are some platform minimums, depending on how you're structuring your campaign or the area that you're in. Because there is sort of a threshold where you have to spend a certain amount to actually have the campaign be beneficial so that you're reaching enough people to actually have the conversions that you're after. One thing that we have seen recently, several people sort of digging into that we didn't talk as much about today, is YouTube advertising that actually allows you to run at a very low cost per day if you're focused on awareness and if that is the right audience. Goal, audience are the two questions that I will have back to any question that I get. But so YouTube advertising might be something to look into. Facebook boosts is a pretty efficient way, cost-effective way to test audiences or messages, especially if you're trying to, shift or pivot your brand in any way. And then Google Ads, depending on your industry vertical and your goals, may be something that is also cost-effective as well.
Absolutely. All right. Unless other questions gets posted, I have one final one. Is it okay to run geofencing ads around your competitor's location? Will they be able to tell if I'm doing that?
That is a great question. From an advertising perspective, running ads around a competitor location can be beneficial. There is not the same rules around competitor locations with geofencing that you might have with pay-per-click. So for example, you cannot add your competitor's name to your pay-per-click campaign and get your ads to show up when people search for that other business. Google does not appreciate it and will not let you do it. But with geofencing, you can put something around a competitor location. You could also, if you want to do it, but don't want to be super tight about it, it makes you feel uncomfortable, consider doing a half-mile radius around that competitor where that competitor is the center, but you're technically using the whole area. As far as them being able to tell if you're doing it, if they see the ad, they may wonder, but there's not necessarily like a list of people that are running ads around specific locations. So they may see your ad, but that's not to say that there's no way for them to determine that it's you running a campaign targeting them specifically. They may just, say, oh, my competitor again, and just assume that it's organic.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Madison.
My pleasure.
All right. So before we wrap up, because we're wrapping up so everybody can get back to their busy schedules, mark your calendars for Thursday, November 12th, we are going to do another webinar on level up your website with Google Analytics. So we're going to deep dive into, there's so many numbers in Google Analytics, to say the least. What are some of those key ones? What do they mean? So that you can start using that to make some decisions. And we're putting this at this time of year because we're hoping 2021 is going to be a much nicer year, maybe a little more predictable. So it's a good time to look, see what's happened. Ideally, you've had Google Analytics running for a while. Even if you haven't, this is still a good chance for you to kind of find out a little bit more so that when you have reports, you actually know what you're looking at. What does that mean? Because it can tell you a lot about your business, not just your website. So this is something we get lots of questions about. So we're just going to bring it to the people. So we'll be sending out some sign up for that shortly, and we look forward to seeing you all there. So I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll be back in November. Thanks, guys.